So multiple civilian tankers have been hit by Iran in the last 24 hours as they try to transit the Strait of Hormuz, leading the United States to ramp up strikes in the region in an attempt to keep the vital passageway open. Meanwhile, we're getting mixed signals from the United States, Israel, and Iran about how long this war is set to go on, and a new update on the school strike as a preliminary investigation now says the United States is responsible and the cause was a targeting error. Now, starting out with the Strait of Hormuz, quickly becoming kind of the central focus of this war and how long it could possibly go on. Yesterday, there were some indications that Iran was considering mining the strait, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that's ever thought about war with Iran for the last 20 plus years. We also heard from President Trump that they were not mining it, and if they even considered it, we'd go after them even harder. And then additional reports saying there were already a couple dozen mines in the strait. The problem there is we've already seen traffic reduced to a near standstill, and mines just add to that. It becomes even harder for any of these commercial vessels to even consider making that trip. Now, in response to this, the Pentagon put out a clip with Secretary Hegseth saying, quote, "At the direction of President Trump, CENTCOM has been eliminating inactive mine-laying vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, wiping them out with ruthless precision. We will not allow terrorists to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage. To the weakened Iranian regime, you have officially been put on notice." And we've seen a number of these vessels being taken out in recent days. The CENTCOM footage talked about 16 mine layers being taken out just in the last, the footage was released. You have to assume, again, we're going to get into some of the planning here in a second, but this has been a known issue, a known point of friction forever in any plans around conflict with Iran. So you have to assume that we were probably going after those mine-laying ships early on. The challenge here is these are not necessarily conventional military big mine layers. They can do this with small fast boats. And with those, we're talking about, hundreds, maybe thousands, relatively improvised civilian vessels that can be used for military purposes. It's going to be very, very challenging to destroy all of those. Now, we did get some pictures of a couple vessels just overnight that were hit in the Strait of Hormuz. It sounds like those were targeted with Iranian drones. One of them, at least, has pretty significant damage. And a spokesperson from the Iranian military said Tehran will, quote, "not allow even a single liter of oil to pass through the Strait of Hormuz for the benefit of the United States, Israel, or their partners." This is going to be really tricky to keep the strait open, no doubt. There's a reason that it has been a core of any plans for a long period of time. There's a couple individuals and channels I want to recommend that do a much better job than I in diving into the unique aspects of this. Sal, of course, we've had on the channel a couple times for what's going on with shipping, is doing constant breakdowns on the Strait of Hormuz right now. And then Mr. Global does a really good job diving into what this means for global oil prices and what it might turn into at what you're paying at the pump. So both of those guys, that's their area of expertise. I watch what they do and try to learn. I'll have their channels and their social medias linked in the description below. Now, speaking to the Strait of Hormuz, we're getting occasional updates from our lawmakers here in the United States, and Democratic Senator Chris Murphy yesterday came out of what he said was a 2-hour briefing on the Iran war, and it wasn't super optimistic, to say the least. Now, the war at this point does feel heavily partisan. There's much more support for it within the Republican Party than the Democratic Party, so take that with a grain of salt. But some of what Senator Murphy is saying here does tend to line up with what we're seeing, so I thought it was worth running through for a little context. He said, "You deserve to know how incoherent and incomplete these war plans are. On the Strait of Hormuz, they had no plan. I can't go into more detail about how Iran gums up the strait, but suffice it to say, right now, they don't know how to get it safely back open, which is unforgivable because this part of the disaster was 100% foreseeable." This is one where I'm a little bit torn because, again, take the administration out of it, the military, CENTCOM, people that have been planning this for decades would have had some degree of say in this, you would think. There's no possible way everyone from top to bottom was silenced and just overlooked on the threat that is shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. I think the more likely scenario here is that maybe we didn't expect Iran to go that route. But look, the senator is spot on when he talks about we don't have a clear way of opening this back up. It's not as simple as pushing minesweepers through and then having commercial vessels flow behind. There is a lot of nuance here. And real quick, the strait, I feel like we always think of this as being a relatively big body of water. It's not. You can stand on one shore and look across and see the other shore. All right, so you're not sneaking ships through there by any stretch of the imagination. Senator Murphy continued by saying, quote, Maybe the lead is that the war goals do not involve destroying Iran's nuclear weapons program, which is surprising since Trump says over and over this is a key goal. But then, of course, we already know airstrikes can't wipe out their nuclear material. It's surprising to hear that. Again, one of the key goals that's constantly listed by the administration is making sure that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. However, as we've mentioned in recent videos, that's probably not something you can do with just airstrikes. It's going to require boots on the ground. If nothing else, how about securing the highly enriched uranium that we know Iran already has? He said they confirmed that regime change is not on the list. All right, I get that. I can see that. Actually, most of what I've seen at this point is that it's kind of regime change by other means. Like the regime has changed. I think it was Rubio that said the regime has changed, but this is not a regime change war. It feels like that's the direction we're going. And maybe I do think there's an aversion in the United States, at least, especially within our government, to talking about regime change wars. So it might just be some how they're phrasing that there. He said, so what are the goals? It seems primarily destroying lots of missiles and boats and drone factories, but the question that stumped them, what happens when you stop bombing and they restart production? They hinted at more bombing, which, of course, is endless war. And this is kind of the heart of the video I made yesterday where I said I think there's a real chance that President Trump declares victory and says, we killed Khamenei, or Israel killed Khamenei. The missile production is severely degraded. We took out a lot of their launchers. Navy and Air Force is destroyed. Because all of that, you can kind of check the box from air power alone. But anything beyond that, we're talking about the high likelihood of boots on the ground. Now, the U.S. strikes have continued. Some updates here on the U.S. and Israeli air campaign. General Dan Kane said that the United States has now struck over 5,500 targets, including 60 ships in the past 11 days. So that is, for somebody who's bad at math, 500 targets per day. I mean, saturating the Iranian battlefield. Admiral Cooper, the commander of U.S. Central Command, provided a little more context here. He said the last of 4 Soleimani-class warships have now been destroyed. And I do want to stress a lot of focus right now from military updates, CENTCOM updates, on the naval component of Iran, which was a threat. At the same time, we never really thought that it would be a challenge to take them out, but definitely a lot of focus of U.S. air power right now going after the Iranian naval capabilities. Admiral Cooper said missile and drone attacks within Iran have dropped significantly. I've not seen a number applied to that in recent days. I think the most recent was General Kane in yesterday's briefing referenced the 90% reduction in Iranian missile launches, 86% reduction in drone launches, but I believe that stat he was referencing from a day prior. So I haven't seen it in the last 24 hours. And then Admiral Cooper did say that the United States is clearly exercising air superiority over vast swaths of Iran. We would have to be hitting 500 targets a day because those cannot all be done with standoff munitions. We do have a lot of Tomahawks. We do have a lot of ATACMs. We do have a lot of long-range cruise missiles. We don't have enough to be carrying out 500 attacks a day, every day for the foreseeable future. So a lot of those now, you have to assume, are being carried out with guided bomb units. Now, looking at the Israeli strikes, which a bit of a change here as well. We're not seeing nearly as much. And I'll play the first clip. Looks like the F-14s might be gone. Iranian F-14s. There was Israeli Air Force is going after airfields quite a bit right now. A lot of missile launchers anytime they poke their head out, as well as missile manufacturing facilities. So there's been a clear focus on not just destroying, and Admiral Cooper talked about this in his briefing today as well. It's not just a matter of destroying what Iran has right now, but making sure they can't just immediately go back and build more. Again, easier said than done. I mean, taking out the facility or taking out the nuclear enrichment facilities, same idea. That helps. It moves the ball in the right direction. But again, you're talking about the know-how of being able to do this. What our understanding is right now from U.S. government statements is that their nuclear program was completely destroyed, but then they rebuilt it and got back on track even faster. So if that was able to happen with their nuclear program, we have to assume that same know-how applies to their missile and drone program. Nonetheless, we are seeing a lot of strikes carried out by U.S. and Israeli forces against some of these manufacturing facilities. Not a lot from Israel in recent days going after actual leadership figures. Now, there are a couple possibilities for that. I think the most likely is that the Iranian leadership is not making themselves easily available as they were in the opening. I mean, they were not easily accessible in the opening days of the war, but clearly they were accessible enough to, I think, specifically Israeli airstrikes. It looks like that's died down quite a bit. And I wouldn't say that there are no more targets. I'm hearing people say that. Well, actually, President Trump kind of hinted at that a moment ago. We'll get into that here in a second. I'm seeing folks say, well, there's no one else left in the Iranian military. There's no one else in their chain of command. That is a gross exaggeration, right? So we're talking about hundreds, maybe into the thousands of Iranian soldiers killed at this point. Like, the military is significantly larger than that. So even when you're talking about the Israeli campaign against Hamas or Hezbollah, I mean, they killed everybody, like 6, 7, 8 layers down the chain of command, and they still had the names and positions of people that they were going after. So they still exist within Iran. They're not completely gone, and there should be no expectation that we could completely remove a military, kill all of their leadership with airstrikes alone. Of course, we can do significant damage, and it looks like that's what's been playing out in recent days. I do want to note that a lot of the Israeli strikes right now seem to be focused on what they say is the foundational capabilities and core operational arrays of the Iranian terrorist regime. So it's not necessarily going after individuals, of course, targets of opportunity, going after missile launchers, but police headquarters, intelligence offices, things like that. And it kind of lines up with a really interesting statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, struggled with that one, where he essentially called on the Iranian people to rise up. He said, it's almost your time. Get ready. We're going to pass the torch. Now, long message here. I'm going to pull out a couple of parts. He says, quote, people of Iran, we are waging a historic war for liberty. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you to remove the Ayatollah regime and regain your freedom. You must act. We are creating the conditions for you to do so. We are your ally, your best ally. You asked for help, and help has arrived. In the coming days, we will create the conditions for you to grasp your destiny. Your dreams will become a reality when the time is right, and that time is fast approaching. We will pass the torch to you. Be ready to seize the moment. Now, a quick note on that. It's hard to understand exactly what that situation looks like on the ground in Iran right now. There is not, prior to this war, there was not like a cohesive opposition party that had any real sway, at least out in the open. I don't want to assume that CIA and Mossad do not have some contacts and have some ability to kind of put together an opposition party of sorts to maybe help organize that. We haven't seen anything publicly. There's been no notable protests or defections within the Iranian military. In fact, after this statement from Netanyahu, the Iranian security services said they have their finger on the trigger. They're watching. They're on edge. Hopefully the opportunity is there for the Iranian people. My gut says that this is a really big ask, that we're just going to stop bombing all of a sudden, and at that time, we'll send out the message, and the Iranian people will rise up and go after the regime that just a few weeks ago killed, 30, 40,000 of their own citizens in cold blood. That is asking for incredible bravery, and they've already shown it. But I think it's a lot to assume that we can get that same level of showing right now at the drop of a hat. But maybe, and it does look like that might be a direction the U.S. and Israel are hoping this goes in. Now, in terms of where the war goes from here, mixed signals all over the place, right? So the Israeli Defense Minister Katz said, quote, the operation led by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu will continue without any time limit until we achieve all of our objectives and decisively win the campaign. Now, domestic messages are important here as well. My understanding is inside of Israel, this war is very popular. So it fits talking to the population of like, we're just going to keep going as long as we need to. A little bit different in the United States where the support isn't necessarily there. The most recent poll we talked about was around 38% support for the war. And when you get into a long-term war, boots on the ground, that falls off even further. So President Trump, in a conversation with Axios earlier today, said the war with Iran will end soon because there is practically nothing left to target. They added in that same article, though, Israeli and U.S. officials say they are preparing for at least 2 more weeks of strikes in Iran. It wouldn't be surprising if President Trump and some in the government, we've already seen this in recent days, start to walk it back a little bit, saying we're getting close. Just hang on. The light at the end of the tunnel is there. We just gotta make it a little bit further, and we'll wrap this thing up. I have no idea of telling which one from the United States or from the Israeli perspective, which of those two is more accurate. And technically, one of those parties could just continue the war. Like the United States could say, we did it, we're done, we're heading home. And Israel could continue their campaign. There's no requirement that these two countries continue this operation every single day side by side. Now, from the Iranian perspective, what they're putting out right now is no negotiations. We're going to keep fighting for a long time. And there's been increased speculation that Iran is Look, this is a tough one, all right, because it kind of gets back to the real Russian army is right around the corner. Just wait, and then they'll take the Donbass. And here we are 4 years later waiting on that Russian army. It's the same kind of idea that Iran is holding back some of their missiles and some of their drones. And there might be a little bit of truth to that. I have a hard time believing that the strategy is necessarily to wait for the big attack, but they very well might be waiting to be able to carry out small-scale attacks, drones and missiles, 1, 2, 3, 5 a day for a longer period of time. So rather than 200 missiles in one barrage once a day, what about 5 missiles in a barrage or 3 every day for 3 months? Based off what we're seeing in the Middle East right now, that could be a viable strategy for Iran to try to come out on top in this scenario. The head of their National Security Council, Ali Larijani, just said, quote, "Tonight we received messages from the U.S. president through the Omani mediator requesting that we negotiate a ceasefire. Our response is that we will not accept any negotiations as long as an entity called Israel exists." So they're digging in, and something we have to consider here, and we see this often with the war in Ukraine, the negotiations happening there, is the two sides have to have an incentive to want to negotiate. And I'm not sure right now we see that in any direction. I would argue that in the United States, the incentive might be domestic political pressure. So the longer this goes on, we might see President Trump start to veer away from continuing this war. But when you're looking at the power center in Israel and the power center in Iran, they're both kind of on track to keep this going for a while. Israel still has a lot of objectives that they want to accomplish. And Iran, for their part, I can understand from their point of view of saying, why would we negotiate now? We need to make sure that however this thing ends, the U.S. and Israel never even think about attacking Iran again. And of course, we're nowhere near that as things sit right now. Now, a couple days ago, made a video providing my assessment on what I believed was a U.S. strike, an accidental strike on a school in Iran. It's gotten, that video got attention, but the story in general got a lot of attention. And the New York Times just came out with their preliminary details of a preliminary investigation. This is a free gift article. We might come back to this and do kind of a follow-up video to the previous one, digging into the strike. But for now, I just wanted to share with you an update, and we'll have this gift link in the description below if you want to read it in its entirety. The New York Times says, quote, "An ongoing military investigation has determined that the United States is responsible for a deadly Tomahawk missile strike on an Iranian elementary school, according to U.S. officials and others familiar with the preliminary findings. The February 28th strike on the elementary school building was the result of a targeting mistake by the U.S. military, which was conducting strikes on an adjacent Iranian base, of which the school building was formerly a part. The preliminary investigation found officers at U.S. Central Command created the target coordinates for the strike using outdated data provided by the Defense Intelligence Agency, people briefed on the investigation said." In that article, they say they reached out to the Pentagon, no comment, reached out to the White House, and Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, said, well, as your article mentioned, the investigation is ongoing. So no official statements there, but it lines up with everything we see, right? It passes the unfortunate common sense test when looking at all the information there. So, I think it's hopefully we get more details on this soon. This is it's bad no matter what, and we addressed a lot of this in the previous video, but we're 12 days on from this at this point, and the longer that it goes without the United States saying anything, like the U.S. government hasn't said anything, right? President Trump has given his opinion a couple times. Secretary Hegseth continues to say the investigation is ongoing. The longer we leave that open for speculation to random accounts to say exactly what they think it is or what it isn't, that's a problem. And it's ceding space in the information aspect of this war that we don't have to. The government will never be able to beat, the Twitter mob to an assessment for something that happens right away in real time. We're not going to do that. That shouldn't be the expectation. We shouldn't hold them to that standard. 12 days is too much. There's something between, 3 minutes and 12 days where we needed to have some sort of statement out and just acknowledge that this is happening, or, hey, we fired X number of missiles. We've only been able to account for 6, so we're looking into this, that, or the other. The silence, I think was not a great way to go about doing this, to say the least. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.